Or like history for dummies. Good morning, Josh.
Hi, Deanna. How you doing?
I'm okay, thanks.
Good, good.
So, Josh, I've called you here today to ask you some very important questions. Uh, Punk rock, man. Like, I got a lot of friends who are punk rockers, and I love it when they play music for me, but I am in no way qualified to put forth any opinions. Now, if you want to ask me like about the Ramones, Black Sabbath, heavy metal, I am your girl, but I need like a little punk rock for dummies lesson here, and I think you can do that for me.
Well, I'm in danger of not saying anything that hasn't been said before on various television programs or movies or whatever thing, and I've watched plenty of them. Um, but I'm enough of a nerd that I've sort of paid a lot of attention over the years, and I was thinking about sort of trying to look at this through the lens of this stuff we've been doing with Albuquerque bands and musicians. So I have the Jerry's Kids first pressing 7 inch here, which is a prized possession for me. And knowing that you're going to be interviewing Gordy Anderson soon, I think, it's a nice sort of preface. And looking at it through the lens of how amazing it is that this record exists is sort of a nice focal point because there's it's for a while every year somebody was digging up a new the first punk band, and people get pretty liberal with that. Well, Johnny Cash was punk because he had this rebellious streak, and then pretty soon we're going back hundreds of years into the roots of rock and roll and all of these things. And I was kind of thinking about how definitively Black Sabbath started metal. I mean, metal
Change
was
the sound.
born right when the beginning of that first riff in the song Black Sabbath was played, right?
And as a
And nobody
history
really
nerd, just like as a history nerd, I teach my kids that that was the day that civilization began. That was the beginning of time. If you ask them, they will tell
right,
you that their whole life, their mom insisted that the world was in black and white before the days that that riff was played.
right, right. I mean,
Like it changed music history right there.
I love you for that. But really thinking about Ozzy would often speak about the Beatles. I mean, he idolized the Beatles, and anybody, everything that came after the Beatles was influenced by the Beatles. But that doesn't make the Beatles a metal band.
Nope.
So for me, my argument is that really it's the Ramones. It really was that era. It was the Ramones playing at CBGB's, and largely because when the Stooges dropped Funhouse or MC5 playing around Detroit, or the early Who. I mean, watching Pete Townsend smash shit and how he played and how it all sounded. You had the Sonics in Tacoma, Seattle area, like playing insane fast things. There's all these precursors. The Kinks, my God. I mean, if there was any single band that preceded so much of this stuff and really did strip it down, and they were raw, their tone was a certain way, they had these speed breaks. Uh, but what didn't happen when Funhouse by the Stooges dropped, or what didn't happen with the Kinks in the same way, was this lightning bolt out to the world that sent this message to kids everywhere. Kids everywhere were hearing and seeing, wherever they could, the Ramones, and they were thinking, that's fucking cool, and I think I can do that. They weren't looking at Eddie Van Halen playing in 78, 79, and hearing that and thinking, that's fucking cool, and I think I can do that. They might have thought it was cool,
But they
but
didn't
not
think they
very
could
many
do
were
that.
thinking, I can do that, right?
No.
And in an era, obviously, before the internet, before MTV, before so many of the forms of communication and dissemination of these ideas, uh, before any of that existed, somehow kids all over the world were suddenly in punk bands, whether it's Joy Division, the kids that formed Joy Division watching the Sex Pistols who had heard the Ramones, or the Damned, and reaching right out to the UK. I mean, the first Ramones album dropped in 76. And that year, just like lightning, all of these bands were doing all of this stuff inspired by that. And I just, nobody else had that effect, and somewhere in there, the Times made Winston Churchill. The Times create these circumstances, and a phenomenon like the New York scene, and most specifically, obviously, the Ramones, couldn't have happened at any other point in history. It just would not have had the same impact, whether it's, the technology available, and the affordability of frankly living. Picture like rundown spots all around Manhattan that you could get for a song. Well, that's not the world we live in now.
No, but back then it was like,
Sure, and
yeah.
and kids being able to just put out a 7-inch like Jerry's kids did, and then 12 years later, my little band, and all of these things, you know, were were really unique to that moment, I think, and the Ramones were just the ones. I mean, I just saw the Devo documentary. That goes back to the early 70s. They were making weird sounds. They were doing weird shit. Uh, and they were Devo before any of that happened. But when they heard the Ramones, they started playing their songs a lot faster and discovered that that's what they were supposed to sound like. And so that's another situation where what I would refer to as sort of an innocent expression, like the guys in Devo accidentally making punk rock, or or the Kinks like getting off on the sound of that distortion, and being like that sounds fucking awesome. And so we've got All Day and All the Night. We've got all these crazy songs from there, turning your amp all the way up, and because the drummer was a hack and couldn't do the hack jazz drumming softly enough, so they turn it up and they're like, well, that sounds fucking killer anyway, right? All of these moments of sort of innocence sort of happen, and the Ramones, like, their innocence was sort of, well, let's go faster and faster, and all of these things. And then of course later on, of all the bands I've been in, I'm proud of what I've done, we're all pretty derivative. I was never like on the front of something insane and cool. I always envied people that had that level of vision. But it's that innocence, that like very new sound, um, that sort of an inspiration, and sort of makes for these cases for punk didn't really say it was the Stooges, it was the Kinks. It
But
was the
the Ramones
Ramones.
were the catalyst. The Ramones were the
Well,
catalyst that brought it out to the rest of the world.
absolutely. I mean, it's like uh, even Bowie, like Spiders from Mars, Hang On to Your Ego, like or Hang On to Yourself, like that song is just sounds exactly like the Ramones. Dun, 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 dun. I mean, that was there. It was innocent. It led to that, but it's like all these people are stuffing a cat in a bag. Bowie and the Sonics and you know, all of these predecessors.
The
But when
buildup.
that bag bust open in New York in 76, 77, thereabouts, the wiliest, craziest, fastest cat to race out of there was the Ramones. And that fucking alley cat just everywhere. everywhere. And it really was a revolution that was, you know, I mean, sure, all of these things led to this, but
But there was so many different influences. If you look at the bands that were there at CBGB's at that exact time, they weren't anything alike. I mean, Blondie's a little different from the Ramones, and the Talking Heads were far more different than that. So it was just like all of these cats in a bag. Everybody's just contributing all of these things, and then one day it catches on, popular culture. Young people figure out they can do that too.
yes, and also, you know, popular culture not afforded the luxuries of the popular culture of the time. I mean, it's so interesting that it was a sort of. I really like thinking about the resilience of it to have had such an effect on the world. Yet we're not talking about million sellers here, apart from Blondie and later Talking Heads. And I love that you brought that up too. This diversity that was going on, you know, in New York of '77, and among the very first was television, and that's Not Loud and Fast. You
It
know, they
was
were.
such a different scene for people that are outside punk rock, new wave, pop music. It's hard to understand how all of these totally different bands then became one genre, supposedly. My
Yeah, well,
take.
and you know, I've thought about this too with how indie rock changed as a term or alternative changed as a term, and they all started off as this sort of expansive sort of collection of sounds that we felt a natural need. I don't think it's always marketing. I think we do this ourselves. It's not just, you know, some asshole at some major label, but you know, alternative meant it was like this hodgepodge of things and a term to describe like, well, not fucking Milli Vanilli or whatever, you know, in that era. And indie rock for that matter, you know, Michael Azerrad writes this great book that sort of the thesis is that punk was over in '77 or '78, and that everything that came after that was indie rock, and that includes Minor Threat, and he wrote extensively about them, and more hardcore, obviously, you know, as a specific subgenre or whatever. But it's like, well, what do you do with all these punk bands after 1978? And I generally still just call them punk bands, but you know, for those that believe, well, punk was this one moment and it happened in '78, you know, what was after that? And of course, by the time, you know, the aughts roll around, indie rock meant something like bands that sound like Modest Mouse, very specific, and that didn't include, you know, the Minutemen or all of these various, very different Sonic Youth, all of these things that were, you know, a lot more abrasive sounding, and so, you know, if you look at alternative or indie rock as a term and how they became very finite, it's the same thing with punk rock. You know, I mean, even within the context of New York of '77, like it wasn't all loud and fast. That was the Ramones specifically.
That was the Ramones
Uh,
specifically.
yeah, I mean, television, you know, that was some sort of weird art rock, pretty technically proficient players, sophisticated arrangements. Blondie was so catchy and dancey and poppy, and the Talking Heads were just fucking weird and funky, you know. And it was sort of, there's a sadness to that, you know, like, well, now we've defined punk rock and it's going to be and hauling ass and great. But again, none of those other bands, as awesome as they were, as innovative as they were, as much of that a part of that scene as they were, and as awesome as it is that we're talking about that too, because that's such an important component that, you know, in the day punk rock meant so many different sounds. But it was the Ramones that everybody listened to and freaked out on, and it was the Ramones that, you know, I mean, and I brought up Jerry's Kids, you know, partly to keep that connection, but people in Albuquerque in 1983 were doing that. And that is amazing. And, you know, what do they sound like? I mean, they've got their own sound, of course, but, you know, you hear the Ramones in there for sure. You don't hear Talking Heads, you know, you arguably hear, maybe the Stooges or whatever, and certainly Gordy can clarify his references, but I mean, that 7-inch really exists, and there's every city has their Jerry's Kids. I don't want to diminish what they've done, but Wipers in Portland. I mean, easily to me, Portland's greatest band were a late '70s phenomenon, and
Must have
clearly,
defined the sound for that city. I mean, I'm not I'm not an expert on punk rock, but when I listen to Jerry's Kids, it sounds like Albuquerque punk rock. It sounds like what we like, the certain genre of punk rock that we like in that part of the country.
well, yeah, and I would say too, because it's got this sort of bouncy, like fun. Yeah, I mean, it's skate rock for sure,
Yes,
and,
yes.
and we can go into all of these little genres and
Yes.
dig really in
Okay.
there, but it has that distinctive feel, and I've got my Albuquerque pride, but let's be honest about what Albuquerque is. Uh, we always wanted to be LA, and whether and of course, Richard Agee had that brilliant revelation about the three strikes laws in
No
California.
kidding. That
And
was brilliant.
yeah, and so to the extent that that's true, and it seems very viable, we
It's
were
definitely
importing we were importing gangster culture in the era when NWA was coming up. We're getting in all of these LA gangsters, and I remember that, like, oh, that guy's a Crip from LA. You didn't want to be fucking around, and we all. I mean, I loved Social Distortion, the Descendents, all of these SoCal punk bands from the early Black Flag. I mean, Albuquerque and Black Flag, like, that's just a thing, and I hear that on the Jerry's Kids 7-inch as well, and so it but if it's coming from that, again, SoCal punk it's poppy, it's catchy, it's loud, it's fast, it's the fucking Ramones, and
But then you make some New York hardcore in there and you get that Albuquerque sound.
yeah, well, and there's a bit of a harder edged thing there too. I mean, like what came later in Albuquerque, certainly. You know,
Well,
I,
wait,
I,
wait, let's go back a little bit. Um, if the Ramones was the first wave of punk rock, what happened after that? So punk rock is now on the map. I mean, musically speaking, like skate punk now comes, and that, like, what's the next evolution of punk rock?
well, I mean, Bad Brains were like a
Yeah.
like a funk outfit in DC, and heard the Ramones, and with their great skill as musicians, were like, all right, that sounds cool. I mean, it wasn't even just for kids that were like, you know not particularly skilled or just buying their first guitar. I mean, this is
The musicians
Bad
as
Brains are
well.
what happens when musicians like understand the fire,
Oh, heck yeah.
and so they, pretty single-handedly invented hardcore, which is such a fun thing. Like, oh yeah, jazz, hip hop, all of these genres. Well, black people gave us hardcore too.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
So was that next? Bad Brains was prior to 1980, wasn't it?
yeah, I mean, they again, there's definitely like somewhere they were talking about hearing the Ramones or whatever, and they made it their objective to be faster than the Damned, because the Damned, they had their reaction to the Ramones, and they were so, for 1976, 1977, they were so fucking fast, and the Bad Brains made it their mission to go faster than the Damned, and then you had Husker Du in the Midwest going faster than that. I mean, they were brutally fucking fast. And so that became sort of this thing. And as punk rock's exploring hardcore and experimenting with as going as fast as you possibly can, whether it's, eventually they stopped doing this and started doing this and cutting the hi-hat or the metronome in half on the drum so they could go even faster, right? Because and they go and things just got faster and faster and faster. But Meanwhile, what happened to Blondie and the Talking Heads and all of these things? And other people began to explore in that direction and into new wave. And so, a young Robert Smith clearly was influenced by this, and some early Cure songs have a little bit of venom to them. But then all of a sudden, we're talking about goth, and if you listen to that two-tone ska stuff with the specials in particular, uh, there was an obvious influence there too. Like now we're marrying, and of course the Clash as a predecessor to that, but pretty early on the Clash was bringing in their reggae influence, and you had all of a sudden the two-tone ska movement, which was very vastly energized, and deviated far from Jamaican ska because of that punk influence, and it just sort of reached out, and that nebulous definition really did open the door for this. I mean, generally when we say that, when we say the word punk, we're thinking loud and fast, but
That's not
it's not.
it.
But it's not. Yeah, I mean, there's
That's
there's so much more to it. Uh, and of course faster and faster and faster, and then eventually of course that had to collide with metal, and we get thrash metal, and we get all of these things, and that's because people wanted that speed, but people also wanted other things. And so it's a pretty straight line from Bauhaus to the Ramones, and to Talking Heads and Blondie and all of that, through the Cure, and the influence is obvious. And so somewhere in there, it was almost like how I described alternative earlier. We're everything but that shit. Like, people were
everything else.
dissatisfied. Yeah, people were dissatisfied with what was going on in rock and roll. I mean, it evolved in its own way, and there, sure, yes, it was great or whatever, but somewhere in there, like, there needed to be something else, um, and so that vision kept going. And I think a lot about later bands like No Means No out of Canada. They were early '80s, but they got very sophisticated in their music. And then by the mid '90s, No Effects was putting out like these, like, mimicking a two-tone ska band perfectly, and metal riffs, and there's no denying their technical proficiency, and they, you know things expanded and changed such that the open-mindedness of that genre really allowed even for some high level of musicianship. And um, one of my favorite all-time bands is Subhumans, and From the Cradle to the Grave is their absolute pinnacle record. I mean, it is one of my favorite albums, period, transcending all genres. And the B side of that album is one long ass song.
Hmm.
And I just love this revolution within revolution. I mean, one of the rules of punk rock was, keep it
Hard
short.
and fast. Yeah.
Yeah. And now we have this big fucking epic song that, displays technical proficiency that some would argue isn't a part of the thing, and long ass songs and all this. But the Subhumans are not less punk for that.
Because
Like,
no,
no, no.
definitely not. Definitely. Well, punk rock today has a lot of really exceptional musicians. They're not just the Sex Pistols up there making noise anymore. There's obviously a lot of things that happened
A
between
100%, and should
each
have been. It should have been
stage.
left open.
The late 80s was, what was that? Hardcore. And then by the 90s, now we're just talking kick ass punk rock.
In terms of musicianship, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But even in the earliest days, I mean, the Stooges were players. That wasn't all
No,
crude.
no.
MC5 even more so. I mean, that was,
Yes.
they were turned up to 11, but they were really maybe not on par with Yes, or any of these sort of virtuosos from the bloated 70s. Um, but they knew how to play. And the Damned, I mean, I think I've cried about this in another podcast with you,
Yeah.
but this Sex Pistols based stereotype about, well, you couldn't even play.
It,
Isn't that what punk rock is?
no,
And it's like,
no.
no, the Damned were always able to play their instruments. Bad Brains, I mean,
Um,
there's a lot of energy or whatever, but it takes skill to move at that velocity. Like,
oh
you
my
know,
gosh.
and not just speed, not just being super gacked out. It's there's some ability there, and by all means, just go and write something like the Ramones classics. And see, is it really that easy?
Yeah, no, not even close.
Like, I mean,
Not even
television
close.
still to this day, I can name few bands that have that show more aptitude at putting two distinctly different rhythm guitars together. Like, the relationship between the guitars in that band were just so complex and well thought out. Your metal virtuosos, one of them plays a melody and the other one plays it a fifth higher, which is really simple to figure out, or whatever. There's seldom that sort of interplay between guitars uh, in much more sophisticated or thought to be sophisticated bands. Television is one of my all-time favorites from that 70s stuff because, as a musician that likes to explore, they gave that technical proficiency and that texture and all of these different sounds and that orchestration of all, these two guitars doing distinctly different things that play well together. Uh, not very many outfits have done that in that same way.
Wasn't television the band you said that you heard first time that changed everything for you?
No, no, who
No.
was that? I mean, definitely Iron Maiden
Oh
was,
yeah, okay.
yeah, very, very different from television. I always like this too. As an Iron Maiden fan, uh, and then later really just immersing myself into punk rock. Uh, and I've read this several times. I'm not alone in this. The first two Iron Maiden albums feel very punk. And Paul Di'Anno kind of looked the part. He didn't have long hair, and always with his leather jacket. He looked like he should have been playing his CBGBs in '77 or whatever, right? And Iron Maiden
Okay.
really, I mean, the first album came out in '80, so they were doing this sort of thing. And Steve Harris, the visionary, I mean, it's his band. He hated any comparisons of Iron Maiden to punk rock because he just thought it was trash. And I just sort of love, like, well, yeah, dog, but those two albums sound like punk with guitar solos. Like, sorry.
Whether you
And
like it or not.
yeah, and I think about that innocent expression, where Iron Maiden really was exploring, these prog bands they were listening to, and they were always pretty sophisticated. But those records sound distinctly punk because they just like the sound of hauling ass like that, because there's a couple of really fast rippers on those first two albums that are like, and yet they weren't influenced by this. And so, arguing further back to, those that like to say, well, the Stooges were the first punk band, and and then we get, so sort of fast and loose about the history of all of this, and it's like, I like feeling like there's an inevitability, like it was inevitable that
It was
somebody was
coming.
going to want to play that fast, and so these innocent expressions just sort of happen, whether it's Iron Maiden actively not wanting to be affiliated with punk but sounding like that. They weren't trying to sound like that, it just sounded fucking cool. And certainly the Stooges weren't trying to sound like the Ramones. The Ramones were just little kids. I mean, they were probably 14 or 15 or whatever, but the Ramones didn't happen
Yeah.
until a few years later.
Well,
Uh,
I see your point here. There are many, many bands that you could argue were punk rock long before the
yeah,
Ramones, but you're saying the Ramones were the catalyst. I mean, just some people would say go all the way back to the Trogs. Like that's a
oh,
long
sure.
time ago.
Kingsman,
Yeah.
and when you listen to the Witch and its speed break from the Sonics, it's good chat, good chat, good chat, good chat. It's fucking flying. Um, but first off, there's a spate of bands that were doing things like that. I mean,
Hmm.
it's Psychotic Reaction by the Count Five. Another great speed break song, and the Kinks preceded all of that. And again, the Who, like all day long,
Oh,
it
that's a
made
really
sense
good
when the Sex
point.
Pistols covered them, and when the Damned covered "I Feel All Right" from the Stooges' Funhouse album from a few years earlier, it sounds so in place on that Damned album, and so it's fair to say that these bands played a role, but nobody fired things up the way that the
The
Ramones did.
Ramones did.
And at some point, we're either going to have a definition or we're not. You
Okay,
know,
so then let's move on. What was the effect that Suicidal Tendencies had?
I mean, that was an interesting one because there was always that little bit of shred, even on that first album, and so that sort of presaged, and it was, I think that was like 82 or 83.
Hmm.
So Kill 'Em All and Show No Mercy, and I think the first Anthrax album all came out like 82, 83, 84. I think it was maybe all of them 83. And I think that first Suicidal Tendencies album was around there. And Suicidal Tendencies was definitely more punk experimenting with metal, and Metallica was definitely more metal experimenting with punk, but even that sort of intermarrying of these genres, Motorhead had been doing that throughout the 70s. And then dating back to Hawkwind, then we all of a sudden we're going from psych to proto metal. I mean, Lemmy always, was like, well, we're a rock and roll band, and they have sort of a boogie kind of thing going on. But Overkill being recorded in '78, just double kick rail all the way through. Uh, I mean, that's thrash 5 years before all of that happened, and so there's a feeling of inevitability here. There's a feeling of like early
Progression.
Beatles when there was a raw moment or the guitars were a little loud and distorted that presaged all of this by years and years. But hopping from Beatles to fucking Suicidal Tendencies, that was looking in the direction of where thrash was going to come from and all of the things that came from that, because that need for punk rock speed and that that need for the sophistication or the darkness of metal riffing or whatever, but that was a natural choice. I mean, the Misfits went from pretty bubblegummy kind of Ramonesy, punk, to my favorite Misfits record, without doubt, was Earth AD, and that was their last one. And all those thrash guys saw that as a seminal thrash record. It was about 82 or 83 because it fucking hauled ass in a way that punk hadn't before. And that was clearly, I mean, the first Slayer album, really sounds like that too. Just doom ta doom ta doom ta doom ta doom ta.
That's a time period that brought those two genres together. It was
Absolutely.
fun time to be alive.
And the way they interlocked, I mean, I remember like in high school in the mid and more late '80s, we would kind of hang out, but you were like a Hesher or you were a punk rocker, and they were so distinctive. But when you really hear the two properly combined, it's like, yeah, I mean, these two were destined to intermarry, and and we're kind of similarly on the outs, especially in the '80s. Like,
Oh yeah.
people didn't know who to be more afraid of, like sick ass Hesher guys or fucking punk rockers, like, when the two really collided in thrash metal, that just made sense. It was awesome.
It just made sense. I would say they started together. A lot of your punk rockers were early freaks, and then they started hearing punk rock, and then they went punk rock, and then the heavy metal kind of followed the punk rock, and they all ended up back together.
I mean, that was certainly my life trajectory.
Yeah.
I mean, metal seemed a little corny. When I really started getting, especially into the Subhumans, um, and sort of more political punk. I mean, not every metal lyric is fucking awesome, right? And
Okay.
and I never sold my records. I didn't abandon that, but punk rock hit me in a
In a
in a
different
certain
way.
way that
Hmm.
just carried me very far. But then, later on in life, like I had my first metal band, and that has more to do with my ability to play on that level increased. Punk rock for a lot of us was somewhat like training wheels. I mean, it was certainly more accessible. And then as I got better, I wanted to explore that. But right now, I would love to be in a punk band. That would probably be what I would do. If I had the time and and the dudes to do it with, I would form a punk band. I don't care
There
if
you go.
I try to fucking shred out or something.
No,
I,
just make music that's fun, that you fast and you like.
Yeah, but also in there too, like, how's this for punk? I'm gonna be in the fucking band that I want, and we're gonna do whatever the hell we want, and we'll play a Slayer cover, or we'll be poppy or whatever.
Whatever you want.
Yeah,
There's
and
exactly, someone told me yesterday, you're exactly as punk rock as you feel.
yeah, yeah, and I've got like the kid and the business, and I think about money a lot and stuff, and 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 all of that doesn't make me feel very punk rock, and it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not going to be a bad parent just because that might be punker or something,
No,
and people will try to, yeah. I mean,
no.
it's a funny thing too, like with rules in punk rock, and we're sort of talking about these boundaries and these definitions and why this is more punk than this, and how this isn't punk because it was a different timeline or whatever thing, and all this. And it's like, well, it's sort of a simpleton thing to say, but no, there's no rules. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, that's cool, but then, if some Nazi guy shows up at the show and starts fucking with people, like, well, kind of there's a rule there. And if your favorite punk band starts sounding exactly like Yes, or some 70s rock thing that punk rock was supposed to react against, well, I don't what do you do with that? And
Yeah.
so yeah, no rules, but then kind of then no definitions. And if there's no definitions, then what are we doing? What are we
Yeah, and
talking
then
about?
I'm really confused. I gotta have definitions.
Yeah,
Uh,
and we do it. We do it. it's
Take
it's
me to the
it's natural in
90s.
humans.
Did Bad Religion change things?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and they were kind of instrumental in, because they cleaned up really nicely. I mean, the first album's pretty raw. You can hear like drummer fighting to keep that tempo and stuff, and which is always awesome. There's something is lost when you see a really good drummer with really good technique, and they're doing this instead of this. You know, something gets lost a little bit, I think. And
Okay.
I'm a big fan of all of the Bad Religion albums, through till I don't know, I lost track of them eventually, uh, but No Control is an all time favorite, and they were pretty cleaned up at that point, pretty technically proficient. The production was spot on. There was one of them was working as a producer, so he had some production chops and access to equipment and things, and so it was this sort of big jump for them. And one could argue that they were sort of instrumental in sanitizing more hardcore, even because No Control hauls ass, and Bad Religion was always pretty driving and pretty fucking fast, even among punk bands. They weren't as bubblegummy as the Ramones had been. Their melodies were a little darker. They were more political. But somehow, with all of that, faster, darker melodies, more political, and all of these things, they met with a pretty astounding amount of success. I mean, they weren't, you know, platinum sellers or anything like that, but a lot of people were listening to hardcore as a result of Bad Religion, maybe more so than a lot of other bands. I mean, I can't really think of anything offhand that has brought music of that speed and aggression to the masses on that level. I mean, Green Day was never quite as hard sounding, you know.
Did it change the sound? Did punk rock as a sound or the various subgenres of punk rock evolve after that? 90s punk changed,
Yeah, I
become
mean,
more different. Where are we today with punk rock? What's it sound like?
God, I mean, I honestly don't know. I mean, because simultaneous to a lot of this, you had like this garage revival revolution, and one of the records that I've been listening to a bit more recently, from the early odds, maybe 2010 or thereabouts, was Jay Retard,
Mm-hmm.
and he was with a band called the Lost Sounds, and they had like all these keyboards and shit, and then he kind of went very like kind of lo-fi. I mean, the production's good, but trashy guitar tone, and made this awesome, awesome album that clearly had this garage rock influence, uh, but kind of more sophisticated writing. And I liked seeing that direction. And Hot Snakes was another early aughts band that that did to me something really awesome with garage rock, and people have referred to them as garage hardcore. And so you get this weird sort of retroactive. We're gonna do a punk thing that sounds like the Sonics or these psych bands from the '60s, and I disparaged that a bit when I was talking with you and Ray the other day, because it became this sort of big trend to sound like the Kinks or whatever, and that really that shit can be pretty cool. But I always liked like the direction that took it forward rather than modeling these bands as accurately as it could. They sort of took the inspiration from an awesome, awesome band like the Sonics, who was innocent. They were just expressing, they just were accidental punk in 1967, 68, like around there. Um, but they were just mean and fast and awesome. And Seattle's so pretty, they're the Jerry's kids for Seattle or whatever. Seattle's so proud of them. I think they were more of a Tacoma band, but, Rio Rancho, Albuquerque,
Yeah,
Seattle,
same thing.
yeah.
Same thing.
But that became like a thing. And obviously, the White Stripes were an extension of that. And so that's just this one little subgenre that went in these directions, right? And and then, I mean, if you think about like another one that I've heard, and I'm an old man now, I'm still listening to the same hardcore records on the way into work, and still the same fucking Iron Maiden records over and over and over. And so I haven't kept up as much as I would like, but little things I hear. Death Heaven was one recently that that caught me. I heard it at work, and I asked the core, he's like, "What the fuck is this? It sounds like shoegaze black metal." And he was like, "Well, yeah, that's pretty much it." And they've got this like heavy kind of shoegaze, like this big wall of
Okay.
sound. You can hear My Bloody Valentine all over it, but the drums are just going hella fast, like death metal speed or black metal speed, and that sort of whiteness in the production, that white noise thing that works with so well with like My Bloody Valentine and things like that, also really is sort of prevalent in a lot of black metal. And so then you take this and you think about, well, where does black metal come from? And obviously thrash metal, and there's a half of that equation where pretty soon we're talking about the Ramones again. And so now we have, this strange sort of subgenre of a subgenre in shoegaze, and this other subgenre of a subgenre of a subgenre in black metal, and these two fused together sonically makes sense. I mean, it isn't, it sounded very natural to me. Like it
Mm-hmm.
was like, and to assert that black metal and shoegaze would go together just because that's such different camps, sonically, it absolutely makes sense. And so just on and on it goes.
It
And, whether it's
does.
somebody just playing, I mean, a former bandmate had great success. Chris Bell from Blind Nine had great success playing in the Briefs, and they were pretty damn 70s punk sounding. They were just a straightforward punk band, a little too fast to really be like spot on 70s punk, but that's what they were doing. And they're still out there touring as far as I know. I know he's no longer with them, but so I mean, there's just so many things that have shot out, and I feel almost like, as much as I would be in a punk band again, part of me is like, if you're in a punk band at this point, but if you didn't have a punk phase and you're playing music, I probably don't want to hear it.
Hmm. So it should be
Like,
part of your education.
I think it should be part of your education to really grasp that, and to carry. I think it's important to carry it forward in some sort of way. I mean, again, to call pretty much all of the music I made in one way or another derivative would be a fair charge. And I have a lot of admiration for people that really carry it forward and sort of come up with this innovation. Like,
Because
yeah,
that's
I'm going
hard.
to be the
It's
guy that puts black metal and shoegaze together. Like, you
you
know,
have to have some real talent to do that. You're
yeah,
not just
and or
replicating
vision.
sound.
I mean, so
Vision.
much of what we've talked about too is vision.
Vision.
There was some talent in the ranks of the Velvet Underground,
Mhm.
but really, why do we talk about them, and where do they fit into all of this, and how is
At
it
the
that they are
top.
a seminal punk band? But they were definitely kind of more vision.
Hmm.
It's just like they were doing weird shit. Like, and that's kind of what made them punk. And God, they were back in, they preceded the Stooges even.
When you talk about doing weird shit and like changing history, we can't skip over the Descendants,
Oh my God, yes. I mean, um, and I think the
which to
Descendants
me is the
are.
best. I'm all about nerd
I, I
punk.
was I was lucky enough to catch them early on, in my sort of career as a punk rocker. They hit hard enough when they hit hard, to appeal to, like a guy that was just coming down from Slayer and Metallica and things like that.
Okay.
And of course, they're just so catchy. But there's a lot going on there. I mean, they're pretty Ramonesy, but My World, oh man, like they fucking hit. And Bill Stevenson is such a phenomenally good drummer too. And so there was this whole other level of musicianship. Uh, there was this sort of sardonic lyrical sort of thing going on that was far more poignant than what a lot of people had to say. And it was, they pretty much hung around the topic of just teen angst and girls and shit like that, but they were just so good. They were just so good. And that's classic SoCal. I mean, that is definitely an Albuquerque inspiring band for sure.
Well, they were the intellectuals. They
Well, and that's the thing, is that there was but they didn't wear it on their sleeve
no,
like
but they
Bad
they had
Religion
brought a
did.
new yeah, okay. But they brought a new twist to it. Now you could talk
Sure.
about nerd stuff.
Yeah, this sort of introspective, um, and a certain crafting with words, but also deeper ideas about teen angst. I mean, Bad Religion really was tackling these big issues, and they're breaking out the thesaurus, and all of these huge words. And lyrically, I would say Descendants were an equal. It just
Really.
it was just more sort of personal social commentary, and yeah. I mean, what a truly great band.
I think so. I think so. I'll just tell you I'll tell you this story. It's one of the best things that ever happened to me. My son, I'm a busy mom. My son's like teenager and he wants to go to a concert. He wants to go see Rise Against. And I'm like, yeah, I'll go see Rise Against. That sounds great. And so it's on the calendar forever. And then we get in the car that night, and I'm a busy mom. I don't pay attention. And we drive all the way into Houston, like somewhere awesome. I'm like, cool, Rise Against. And then I go in and I look at the t-shirt stand. And I'm like, Matt, who's opening for Rise Against? He's like, some band called the Descendents, he says.
Oh, I love this story.
And I'm like, you are the best kid. I love you so much. That was like one of my very proud. That was actually a really good show. That was the same show
Did
where he wanted to go in the pit. And I was like, his dad's like, bring it, let's do it. And I'm like, wait till all these other fools wear themselves out, I say, because he's still pretty young. And
right?
and then I'm like, okay, now go now, Matt. Let me hold your glasses. No, no, I'm fine.
Oh,
Once,
oh.
twice, comes back, hands me the glasses. Damn, mom, how do you know everything? I'm like, I've been in there before.
Yep, your
So
mom's been in this circle.
I
I,
have, and you can see the
I
people
love
around
that
us are
story.
watching my husband and I. They're like, that's so cool. You're taking your kid in the pit for the first time. Like, he brought me to a Descendants show.
That is so awesome. I
Yeah.
I I've of course tried to force my daughter to be very into music and all of these things, and she found her own way, to be sure, and it's awesome. I mean, she likes really good music. She'll be turning me on to like some newer kind of hip hop stuff, and she
Yeah.
really likes Lana Del Rey and has made me a fan. But there are places where we converge, and she on her own absolutely loves the Adverts, and they're one of my favorite 70s punk
just
bands, period.
it
And
just
like
reads your
knows every
mind.
word to Crossing the Red Sea. And and
Oh,
and
that's
you know,
cool. I'm
it's
gonna go
yeah.
listen to that now. If for anyone who's wondering, I am doing this strictly because now I have an audio recording and a transcript of all of these bands from
Oh,
every interview I've done, and I can go back and make a list, and I have a new playlist.
awesome.
That's my
Awesome.
plan. That's
Yeah,
my
I mean, I
plan.
I would say highlights MC5, Sonics, give old Who recordings a new listen. Listen for that. Listen for that
Okay.
barking dog. Listen for that fucking anger, and listen.
Okay.
Because we grew up. I mean, you think about Magic Bus or whatever, and this is like a classic rock band, and then you listen a little more closely and listen for that anger, and God damn, it's there. I mean, Pete Townsend was just destroying his hands on his guitar, and then destroying his guitar like.
No, you're
That was
totally right. We're big fans of The Who in this house, which was the first concert we ever took our kids to.
oh nice.
Yeah, and then I kept them home from school the next day because I was like, hey, you gotta have priorities in the world. You gotta go see a Who show, stay up late, have a good night. Yeah, that was great. I'll send you a
all
video.
all sorts of good parenting.
I'm gonna go do that now. Listen to a little bit more of early, lots of stuff. Okay, my
Yes.
words are stopped coming out of my mouth. I'm
Yeah, I
starting
think
to stumble.
we're over the proposed time now by 24
Yes.
minutes.
Is that what
Love
we
it.
said? 30 minutes. Okay. Thank you,
Yep.
Josh.
We can
I'll be,
I got
and
keep going all day.
okay. Well, I can't wait to have all of our friends debate some of these topics with you.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll receive a little bit of a grilling. I'm not trying to be the Henry
No,
Rollins of Albuquerque or something, but
no.
I always like talking to you, so how was I not gonna?
Yeah, I think you should throw out something really controversial so that everyone will start arguing and want to do my show.
Okay, Green Day was the first punk band.
Do not say that on my podcast.
That'll stir them up.
Now I have to go and edit this. All right. Thanks,
uh,
Josh.
I'll talk to
We'll
you soon,
talk
Deanna.
again soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.